Behind me, you could see some houses collapsed. And on the 2nd of January, together with our photographer Huang Yaozu, we flew from Hong Kong, China to Japan to report the news about earthquake in Japan. And since the 2nd day of this new year, we've been staying here for several days in the affected areas. We've been investigating and visiting people. And right now, in this place, there have been some houses collapsed during the earthquake. For example, behind me, those are 2 buildings damaged, and the foundations have been separated from the houses because the houses have been rooted out, and when they collapsed, the cars by them have been cramped, and you could see the cracks on the ground. But from where I am standing now, it's pretty solid, so it could support me. And the sandbags have been placed just in case that there may be some secondary damages in the future. That's why they have been fully prepared. But for the 2 collapsing houses, there have been no cleanup right now. They have to just leave them there. There have been so many affected areas in Ishikawa prefecture. And the earthquake with a magnitude of 7.6 happened in the Noto Peninsula. And 2 cities have been severely hit. In one of them, there are 6,000 households, and 90% of the houses have fallen down. But as to the casualties, it's about 30. But in the city of Wajima, I've paid visit to Wajima, and the situation was pretty severe. A very famous scenic spot by the coastal side had fire breaking out during earthquake, and 200 houses were burned down. It's pretty famous. If you once paid visit to Wajima, you would know that along the coastal lines, there was such a scenic spot, and that was about an early morning market with over 100 years of history. And behind the market, there are residential houses accommodating about 200 households. And also, we could visit the memorial halls and also the scenarios for TV shooting. And during the earthquake, fire broke out. As you could see in our bird view, this place has been taken down. Some houses were taken down, and even the cars were damaged. And a multi-storied buildings, I guess it was 7-floored buildings, used to be an art gallery, but now it fell down completely. And another residential house was taken down as well by that art gallery. But on the 3rd day of January, I saw some rescuers saving people from those falling buildings, and the rescuers took cloths to cover the site. One man buried under has been saved, but this person was severely hurt with malfunction of the cardiopulmonary situation. And the 72 golden saving hours have passed, but the rescue work is going on. And according to what I have observed, since those places are by the coastal lines, and it's very difficult for the transportation, especially after earthquake, many big equipment could not get by. Some institutions have to resort to the ships to transport the equipment or machines for saving. But that's not enough. In the future, we have to pay close attention. And now I would love to share with you about the living conditions of the affected people. I've gone to several places accessible to me right now to interview the local people. And I saw that the residents were receiving the materials from the municipal government. As to the materials sent out, they're not food. Those are usually for repairing the houses, but there was no food and no water. So I interviewed a lady. She said that there was no power and no food and no water. It's difficult to cook food. Even the washrooms could not be used. I've also visited a supermarket. Because of the earthquake, all the food scattered all around because of the earthquake, and some locals are still shopping inside. It's pretty dark. They have to take their flashlights. So when I entered in, I was wondering what's happening, but all the buyers were taking the flashlights to pick their desired food. But there was not many to choose from. The shelves have basically been empty, and only 2 staff remained there. According to the staff, there should be a lot more workers, but after the earthquake, they couldn't make it there. So the shop owner invited one other salesperson from the surrounding supermarket. So in total, making the number of salespeople too. And even though we can access some rescue materials, they are not sufficient. And it's pretty dark because of the blackout. Sometimes difficult for them to know the whereabouts of the materials. The most urgently needed for some houses are water, for example, because they have to make milk powder for the babies and they have to cook food, but now there is no water. They have to wait there patiently. And in Wajima City, I met 2 youngsters on the street. They are covering themselves with blankets. The first idea that hit me was that maybe they were cold. And the second reason was that in such a situation, if they took their blanket all the time with them, they could directly go to the shelters because the shelters are lacking such materials. Sanitation facilities are lacking as well. For example, there are just some transient toilets by the shelters. The residents are not complaining, they're just feeling helpless. Complaint doesn't help. The 3 roads leading to Wajima have been blocked because of the mudslide and the blockage. The third way was also cracking. A red car fell in. So the only one road connecting to the city is only one way. When we got out of Wajima City on the same night, because of the traffic jam on that road, we intended to drive for 100 kilometers, but it took us 8 hours. Because we have to give first priority to the rescue vehicles. We have to give way. That's why we line up and waited for a very long time. And then the Japanese government decided to prioritize the ambulances or the other rescue vehicles on that road. So if we come later than the 2nd day of January, it would be even more difficult to enter into the city. As I said, the heavy machines and the rescuers found it difficult to access into the city because even the airplanes could not land here in the affected area there because of the lack of airport. So it took a long time for the rescue work because of the insufficient materials and equipment, and added by the situation of no water and no power. life was pretty hard. It's the same thing for the transportation. There is only one way, one lane, and there are cracks on the road. There are some heating facilities or fuels that were blocked out from the affected area. So people were saying that if they want to fill their cars, there will be a quota. Now, the maximum is 10 liters to 16 liters. And even the filling station, the cars are lining up. It could take like at least 1 hour. So the situation is pretty severe now in the affected areas. And since it just rained, according to the weather forecast, today there will be a possibility of 70% of rainfall. And tomorrow there may be even a round of snowfalls. So people's lives would be harder. And for the rescue work, it causes more impediments. But we are following closely here, hoping there will be some improvements. And in Ishikawa, there has been a very special institution, that is the nuclear power plant by the ocean. There are 2 reactors. After the Fukushima incident, that nuclear power plant was closed. And during the earthquake, there were some accidents in it with not very severe consequences. There was fire breaking out in the transformers. We could hear the cracking sound from the transformers, according to the local people, and the fire was put out. But because of the shaking and the power out, water inside the cooling facilities was leaking. 2 days ago, we were suspicious about the situation in the power plant because in the surroundings, within the radius of about 10 kilometers, the monitoring stations have failed at the number of 13. So 13 monitoring sites failed because of the earthquake, which means almost 10% of the data captured were inaccurate. So whether there will be some pollutants coming from the nuclear power plant, especially the water, we are unsure. And in the past days, there have been some earthquakes. Even this morning, when I was sleeping, I could feel the shaking. Of course, I felt panicked. And I was counting the time by seconds. Usually, the aftershocks lasted for less than 1 minute. Otherwise, the damage would be very severe. And the nuclear power plant is a hazard. And the authority planned to restart this nuclear power plant. The Japanese government introduced a policy which was if the nuclear power plant situates on the earthquake belt, that it should be closed. But they decided that the power grid proved that this power plant was not situated on the earthquake region. So they restarted this power plant. Otherwise, the consequence this time would be much more severe. Of course, the residents are complaining about the situation right now. No food, no heating facility, no water, and even no residents. 6,000 houses fell down, so they need a lot of shelters and temporary settlements. I saw the on-site equipment. People have to enter into the shelters very slowly. If they couldn't access, they have to stay put. And that situation was because of the lack of preparation. After all, Japan has seen frequent earthquakes in the cities, in the villages, if the transportation was fully connected, the rescue work would be much easier. But by the ocean, there may be just one main road by the ocean or another road meandering through the mountains. It's very difficult for the roads to be built. So the government should be fully prepared about the possibility of an earthquake because of the poor transportation situation here. So what next if an earthquake hit? They didn't prepare with a contingency plan and in-depth analysis. If they did have such a plan, then they're not executing them to the full. Living by the ocean side is a choice. They want to build a home here, but a disaster may strike. After the occurrence of the disaster, should there be effective rescue work? And it's possible that there will be people getting sick because of the poor weather conditions. What if there is no food? What if something happens to the elderly people? We should thought about them through, because accessibility is the problem by the ocean. Based on our observations this time, we have realized some of the loopholes in the government policies yet to be improved and resolved. Of course, now, the affected people urgently need the supplies and food, especially, to resume their daily life. And that's all for my sharing. Thank you for watching. Allow me to share with you about the living conditions. I've visited several accessible places like the nuclear power station and Wajima City to interview the local people. And I saw that some locals are receiving supplies from the Japanese government. They're not food. They're like such blue cloths to repair their houses. People complained that there was no water and no power, making it difficult to cook food, and the washrooms cannot be used or cleaned. I've also visited a supermarket. Because of the earthquake, all the food scattered on the floor. But people are still shopping. It's so dark inside. People took their flashlights to pick the food. Some are sold out, but they are still paying, and 2 staff remained, according to the staff. There should be a lot more staff working here, but because of the earthquake, they couldn't make it to the post. So they asked for help from the neighboring supermarket. Some of the supplies have been here, but not sufficient. And there was poor signal of the cell phone, and they didn't know the whereabouts of the supplies. One of the interviewee has 8 children, so they urgently need water to make the milk powder, to cook bread or other food for the children. But there was no water now, so they have to wait. On the streets of Wajima, I saw 2 youngsters covered up by blankets, even though they have layers of clothes on them. I was wondering why the blankets, maybe because of the coldness, or maybe now they are displaced with the blankets on them, they could go to the shelters directly for help. After all, the shelters may not have enough quilts or blankets for them. According to the shelters I visited, it's pretty simple. The food was limited. Sanitation was poor. There was toilet in the buildings, and outside there were 2 makeshift toilets. The affected people are not truly complaining, but more importantly, they felt hopeless. Complaints didn't help. There are 3 roads leading to Wajima City. 2 of them are already closed because of the mudslide and blockage. The 3rd way was the way we took. And on our way, we found a big crack in the middle, and a red car fell inside into the crack. So that was the only road leading to Wajima, but it's a one-way road. The 2 directions have to wait for each other to pass by, and they take turns to drive on the road, on the one only lane. Our traveling distance was about 100 kilometers, but it took us 8 hours. Another thing was that we have to give way to the rescue vehicles. That's why we have to stand in a very long line. And the Japanese government decided to make that only one way leading to Wajima to be the road guarantee for the rescue vehicles. So if we came here on the 3rd of January, it would be much more difficult to access. Transportation is a big problem here, as I said. The rescuers couldn't make it very smoothly, and the big transportation vehicles couldn't come. There is no airport for the airplane. If it's the ships, it takes a longer time. So the rescue work is insufficient right now, and it takes time. Another problem is blackout and lack of water. People are living in the darkness. They couldn't even access to the drinking water, added by the fact that there is only one road leading to the city, and the lack of heating supplies and fuels. It's heard that in the future, if the residents have to refill their cars, there will be a quota. For example, for one time, they could only refill for 10 to 16 liters, and that's why there is severe traffic jam outside the filling station. It took like 1 hour to wait in the line. So the situation is pretty difficult in the affected area. And it rained just now. According to the weather forecast, there will be 70% likelihood of another round of rainfall and possibly snowfall tomorrow, adding more difficulties to the local lives and the rescue work as well. But I will continue to follow closely, hoping for improvements. Allow me to share one more piece of news about the power plant by the seaside. There are 2 reactors. On March 2011, during the Fukushima incident, that power plant was closed. When the earthquake hit this place, some accidents happened inside, but with no severe consequence. One of the transformers was on fire, according to the staff. They heard the cracking sound from the transformer and they could smell the fire. Then they put out the fire on the transformer, and the cooling water tank for the spent fuels caused attention. The water leaked from the tank because of the shaking of the ground. According to their monitoring device, there was no impact caused by the leakage. But 2 days ago, we were suspicious about it. We found that in the surrounding 10 kilometers, there were about 100 monitoring sites, and 13 of them failed, which meant during the earthquake, the 13 monitoring sites may generate inaccurate data because of the blackout. So the data may not be accurate enough, and we were unsure about whether the water was polluted. Especially, there have been some aftershocks. At 5 or 6 early this morning, when I was sleeping, I felt very conspicuous shaking, and that happened every day. Of course, I was panicked during that time, and I was counting the seconds. Usually the aftershocks lasted for less than 1 minute. Otherwise, the consequence would be more severe. And with the aftershocks, it would be hazardous for the power plant. After all, it was planned to be restarted. The Japanese government came up with a policy. If the power plants were built upon the rift zone, it should be closed. But for power plants built by the seaside, there are a lot more in Japan. But the authority decided that this power plant specifically was above the rift zone, and the local power grid claimed for this power plant to be away from the rift zone. So this power plant was planned to be restarted. If it was already restarted before the earthquake in January this year, the situation would be much more severe. Right now, for the affected people, there have been some complaints, especially about the blackout, no heating supply, no food, no residence. Considering that 6,000 houses fell down, they need a lot of shelters and makeshift settlements. On the site, I saw almost no rescue equipment. When their houses fell down, they have to go to the shelters. Otherwise, they would stay buried under the ruins because of the lack of preparation. There should be more fully prepared. After all, Japan saw frequent earthquakes. If the earthquakes hit the city or other accessible villages, rescue work would be much more easier. But by the seaside, since the roads were limited, for example, there may be only one way along the seaside and another one in the mountains, it's difficult to repair the roads. So they should be fully prepared for the possibility of an earthquake. The cities along the seaside, near the rift zone, should have a contingency plan and in-depth analysis. With the plan, why aren't they executing the plans? I think those are the words that the local residents would love to speak out. To live here is their choice. They want to build homes here, but the possibility of an earthquake remains. If it does happen, should there be effective response to avoid the severe impact? For example, in the cold weather, there might be people getting sick, and with no food, what could happen to the local elderly? We should think more thoroughly about it. After all, there are so many cities along the seaside. Accessibility is an issue. What if other earthquakes happen in the wake? And during this accident, we found some room of improvement in Japan. Right now, what's urgently needed by the residents is just supplies to enter into the affected area, to resume their daily lives. And that's the information I would love to share. Thank you for watching.